Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein and it is Wednesday, June 20th, and the Yankees just threw an absolute beating on the Mariners last night. The Mariners come into the stadium hot, really one of the hottest teams in baseball. They put a pitcher on the mound, Marco Gonzalez, who'd only given up 3 home runs all season, and bam, Stanton goes yard. Hicks 2-run shot. Andujar 2-run bomb, and then Glaber takes their bullpen deep. That Seattle ball club had to go back to their hotel kind of shell-shocked last night, like what happened? Because not only did they get raked over the coals by our bats, but Domingo Germán threw an absolute gem, just 1 earned run over 7 dominant innings, 9 strikeouts, and I hate to say it, but Jordan Montgomery has to be sitting home watching this and wondering about his future on this team, because this Germán is a star in the making. I mean, he looked like Severino last night. I mean, it was as dominant a performance as we've seen out of any pitcher all year, and this Yankee staff now has a team whip that's walks plus hits per innings pitched of 1.08. That's better than the Astros, that's better than the Red Sox, that is better than the Indians. So good times, Yankee fans, and keep it coming. You can follow us on Twitter at Bombers Podcast is the handle. You can also send us questions. We'll try to answer each and every week in our mailbag segment here on the podcast. You can like us on Facebook, subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher. You can also drop us a line, 646-854-4959. And as always, you can send your comments and questions to joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us. We love engaging with you. Coming up a little bit later on in our Twitter poll this week, some interesting results when we asked whether Clint Frazier should be untouchable in trade talks. I'll reveal your answer and mine, and I'll answer a fascinating question from one of our followers about just how good this Yankee team really is, and specifically how they stack up against that fabled 1998 squad. Also, he's the host of the excellent Bronx Pinstripes podcast. Andrew Rotondi rejoins the show for part 2 of our wide-ranging conversation, and we'll go through the good, the bad, and the ugly from this last week of action. All that and more coming up on today's Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. Which of these players was the only one not to hit 3 home runs in a World Series game? Was it A, Albert Pujols, B, Reggie Jackson, C, Babe Ruth, or D, Carl Yastrzemski? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
Well, Brian Cashman is going to have some interesting options this trading deadline. Just last week, we were talking about which pitcher we should deal for, whether it should be, Garrett Cole, Jay Happ, maybe Tyson Ross, but I'm not sure any of those 3 guys have had a start as dominant as Germán's last night. And that was against a really good hitting ball club, but, all he gave up was a double to D. Gordon and a home run that barely got out to Nelson Cruz, but the Yankees had a hell of a week. I mean, it took 3 out of 4 from Tampa. They really should have had that 4th game. Sabathia was very good, 7 2/3 innings, 10 strikeouts, 3 runs, but the bats went cold on Sunday. However, that game was really the exception, as we've seen a number of Yankees start to really heat up, especially Aaron Hicks. But today, I want to focus on a few of our pitchers, so let's break it down and talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly as we take a hard look at some individual performances from this last week of action and see who delivered and who did not. Now, I talked about Germán's gem last night already, but on Monday night in Washington, Sonny Gray once again delivered in 95-degree heat, no less, against a really talented Nationals lineup. Sonny was very effective. Now, he didn't give us length, but I blame that on the extreme heat and humidity. So 5 strong innings for Sonny, 7 strikeouts, just 2 earned runs, and a single walk. So this upswing we've seen out of Sonny Gray over the last month or so appears to be real. But when Sonny left that game, there was 1st and 3rd and nobody out, and Boone made the correct call and brought in Jonathan Holder, who since his return from AAA in April has been nothing short of magnificent. Apparently, Holder used his time in Scranton to develop his slider. and it's really paid dividends. Holder entered that game in that kind of a pressure situation, just a one-run lead, and proceeded to give up nothing. First and third, nobody out, and the Nats came up completely empty, and this Yankee bullpen is starting to edge into all-time great territory. In the last 16 games, the Bombers bullpen's collective ERA is 0.56. They're shutting teams down with authority, and we talked about Betances last week. He came in later in that game on Monday and struck out the side, but how about a word for Aroldis Chapman, who's having a career year, and I haven't talked about him enough. It's a little deceiving the way he operates because there's almost always base runners. I mean, he looks like he's in trouble, but then he isn't. Chapman's ERA is 1.14. Now, I'm not comparing them, but Mariano Rivera never finished a season with an ERA lower than 1.38. That was in 2005. And Chapman's WHIP now stands at 0.88. And there were only 3 seasons in Mariano's entire career where he managed a WHIP lower than that. So this is elite territory for Chapman and the rest of this Yankee bullpen, including A.J. Cole, who comes in last night coming off 21 days of rest. 21 days. You figured he's going to be a little wild, but no, 2 innings of pure filth, no hits, 3 strikeouts. And as far as our offense, as always, it's a different guy every night, but we got to lead with Aaron Hicks, who's just completely locked in. I mean, he's on every pitch. And I've talked about his inconsistency, which has been a problem for him, but who knows, maybe he's been listening because Hicks has really showed up this week. Check this out, a double, 4 home runs, and 6 RBIs. And Didi continues to emerge from his extended slump in a big way, hitting .385 this week with 3 home runs, 4 RBIs, and a triple. Aaron Judge continues to lead this offense, hitting .321 this week, and last night knocking in his 47th RBI of the season on June 19th. Not bad. 4 doubles this week for Judge as well, and the rookies just continue to shine, both of them. I mean, Andujar and Glaber. Glaber hit .380 this week with a pair of home runs, including an absolute bomb last night. 5 RBIs this week for Glaber. And Andujar, who'd kind of been slumping a bit, broke out as well last night with a big 2-run shot and a single as well. Now, as far as the bad, honestly, there really wasn't anyone who was bad this week, but if I had to point at 2 guys who kind of need to pick it up, one would be Greg Bird, who had only .218 this week. But on the other hand, he had a pair of doubles and a home run, a couple of nice defensive plays last night as well. And you got to remember, he didn't really have a spring training. He went right into surgery, so I'm going to cut Bird some slack, and I'm also going to cut Sanchez some slack as well, because I see definite signs that he's coming around. I mean, last night, yeah, he came up empty, but he hit 2 balls like right on the button. In fact, one of them was the hardest hit ball in the majors this season. Exit velocity, 121 miles an hour. And he had a home run and a double and 4 RBIs this week as well. So I got to be honest, there was no one who gave a really bad effort this week, and certainly no one who made the ugly section either. And that's a first. And you guys know by now, I tell it like it is. If there's a guy that's stinking it up, I'm going to say so. But just really a phenomenal week for the Bombers. And our runner-up to the good section is 23-year-old right-hander Jonathan Loaisiga, native of Nicaragua, who gets called up from Double-A for his Major League debut against the Rays on Friday night. And I just loved what I saw. Cool as a cucumber, no nerves, attacked that strike zone, and just filled that scoreboard with nothing but zeros. And again, this guy's coming up from Double-A, and he started the season in Single-A. But great stuff from Loaisiga, a nasty curveball, just 3 hits, 6 strikeouts, and 5 impressive innings. And tonight he goes up against a better hitting ball club in Seattle, so we'll see what happens. The Mariners counter with King Felix, who's had a tough year, 5.44 ERA. So this is a game that we should have an excellent shot of taking as we continue to lead the majors in win percentage and make the strongest possible case that we are in fact the best team in baseball. Still a ways to go, but looking at this Yankee ball club right now, you gotta like what you see. I mean, you gotta like it a lot. Back in a moment. Back here on Bronx Bombers, and our featured guest once again is Andrew Rotondi, host of the Bronx Pinstripes podcast. Andrew joins us for part 2 of our conversation, which we begin with a question about the Red Sox. So looking at the standings, Andrew, and I do that compulsively, I always have, we're locked in a very tight race right now with Boston. The rest of the division is pretty much irrelevant. I don't see any of those 3 teams making a run at all. So how impressed are you with the Red Sox? Do you think this goes down to the wire, or have they benefited to an extent from an easier schedule, and maybe the Yankees find some separation as the summer moves along?
Man, you're going to torture yourself if you're looking at the standings every single day, because I think they're going to go back and forth, don't you?
Yeah, well, well, last year at this time, we were sort of going back and forth with Baltimore as far as who was in first place, and look how that turned out. So you never know.
Yeah, I just think that the rest of the American League, other than the top teams, is so bad, mediocre to bad, that the Yankees and Red Sox are just going to win a ton of games. I know they're on pace for 110. That's probably not going to happen, but I could easily see them both winning 100 to 102. And in that case, you're going to win 101 games and host the wild card game if you don't win the division. So I think both teams are going to push the other one. And the last 3 games are at Fenway Park. And I think that could decide the AL East. And that would be pretty damn exciting if it did.
Yeah, on that note, it seems kind of ridiculous to me that a team that might win 109 games but ends up in second place because they happen to be in the same division as a 110-game winner should have to host a wild card game. I mean, the NHL, in my opinion, does it the right way, where playoff seedings are determined solely by record regardless of division. But what's your take, Andrew? Is that something that Commissioner Rob Manfred should maybe change?
Can I answer that question on October 1st?
No, you can't.
No, because okay, so Rob Manfred, absolutely not. Because what's better for baseball? It's to have the Yankees and Red Sox fighting it out for the division and the loser hosting a 1-game wild card. Now, as a Yankees fan or a Red Sox fan, and you don't want to host that game, and you're saying our team is so freaking good, it's unfair that we're hosting a wild card game. I get that. I will probably feel that way if the Yankees have to host the wild card game. But from a Major League Baseball perspective, from a Rob Manfred perspective, this couldn't be working out any better for them.
It's true. The way it's set up now, it definitely makes winning the division a major priority.
Right. If the last 3 games of the season, which are at Fenway Park, are like playoff games, I mean, that's gold for the league.
Now, you're a guy who's well informed as to our pool of prospects. Talk about a couple of guys we have in the minors that you're most excited about right now, and also how you think the Yankees did in the draft a couple of weeks ago. For those that didn't follow, the Yankees drafted Anthony Siegler, who does basically everything, every position. He catches, pitches with both hands. He's ambidextrous. But give us your take on some of the top prospects and the draft, Andrew.
Well, the draft, it's like, I don't ever call myself like an expert on the draft because honestly, I don't watch any college baseball, and all I know is what I read about these guys. And Siegler just seems so, I mean, he's obviously so talented because he can do everything. The fact I talked about this on our last episode, where it just boggles my mind that you could have the coordination and the athleticism to be able to pitch with both arms, and that's what this 18-year-old can do. So obviously he's a freak athlete. I thought it was interesting that they drafted a ton of catchers. I know you don't draft for position, but that has been a position of strength. At least Cashman has been able to evaluate catchers recently. We've seen a lot of guys go on to be players for other teams, and he's gotten some good trade value out of his catchers. So I feel confident in him drafting at that position. But other than that, I really don't know a ton about the draft. As far as the prospects go, I'm really excited for Justice Sheffield. He is the top pitching prospect in the organization. I would put him on the list of untouchable prospects at number 2. I don't consider Torres an untouchable prospect anymore, but he's untouchable. And I would say Sheffield number 2, just for the potential of what he can be as a starter. And from there, we're seeing Loaiziga start on Thursday, and he's coming out of Double-A. So that's a huge jump for this kid. I think he's number 12 overall in the system. I'm sure not a lot of Yankee fans are familiar with him just because he hasn't been on the top 5 boards and stuff like that.
And what's your take on Clint Frazier? Is he a guy that Cashman looks to package in a deal, or is he sort of the heir apparent to Brett Gardner in left field?
Yeah, I mean, he's not considered a prospect anymore, but he's also one of the best young players in the organization. I think he gets traded. I just don't see a way how he fits on this team in the next year and a half unless there's a major injury in the outfield, because they love Aaron Hicks. I disagree with how much they love Aaron Hicks, but the fact is they love Aaron Hicks and they love his defense in center field. They don't think Clint Frazier can play center field, so that rules that out. The only position for him is left field. And I don't know if you've seen, but Brett Gardner's been their best player since May 1st. So Brett Gardner's not going anywhere this year, and he's got a very affordable team option for next year. I could easily see them picking that up. And Do you think they're going to keep Clint Frazier in the minors through 2019? Because that would be ridiculous.
No, I mean, the only way I see it playing out in Frazier's favor is if Gardner's performance falls off over the course of this season, but I don't expect it to. Although this year actually is sort of a mirror image of last year for Gardner in that he had a horrible April and an amazing May. May ended up being his best month last season by far. So the only way I see the Yankees not picking up that option and opening the door for Frazier is if Gardner really falls off the map. Now, as far as Aaron Boone, he's had a pretty smooth run so far as fan satisfaction, media attention. Of course, winning solves everything, but there have been some moves he's made with the lineup and the bullpen that have been kind of perplexing. How would you assess Boone's job as manager so far?
Some of the things he did early in the season with the bullpen really pissed me off. Like, he used Holder in a lot of high leverage spots, and that was when Holder was really struggling. It was before he got sent back down to the minors, and I just was pained every time Boone used him in a high leverage spot, and I didn't understand it. Since then, Holder has been really, really good since he came back up. He also continued to use Betances in 2 innings of work, even though we've seen time and time again that not be good for Betances. And I understand that maybe Boone needed to see it for himself. That's something Girardi learned with Betances, and I guess Boone needed to learn it for himself, but all the Yankees fans sitting at home knew that already. So that was frustrating. In the lineup, we're kind of splitting hairs with the lineup decisions, aren't we? Because like we said at the top, this is the best offense in baseball, and they haven't had guys all click. So yeah, there's here and there moves where I disagree with batting Hicks leadoff. And I disagree sometimes giving guys days off when they played, it seemed like 4 games in the month of May because of all the rainouts. But Boone is going to stick to his plan, stick to the Cashman and the analytics plan. So I don't know. How can you argue with the scoreboard so far?
You can't. Okay, final question, Andrew, and I appreciate how gracious you've been with your time. As I discussed with our podcast audience last week, I think it's total insanity that the DH is not in both leagues. I really can't see any rational basis for it, but I know some people still defend it. Give the listeners your opinion, if you would, on whether or not this should be changed, and if you think it will be changed.
I think it should be changed, and it's never going to be changed for pitchers batting in both leagues because the DH is too much of a premium position as far as salary goes. So the players union would never give up the DH because that's a $10 to $15 million or maybe even more if you're Giancarlo Stanton position. So they're never going to give that up. I don't know why they wouldn't fight for it in both leagues because that's more jobs, but that's I guess a different discussion. I don't even think it's the injury. The injury is part of it, but who the hell wants to watch pitchers hit? It's painful. They stink. 9 times out of 10, they're going to go up there and either strike out or attempt to bunt. How is that fun to watch? How does that put a good product on the field? It's not something that these guys practice. They don't do it anywhere else except the National League at the pro level. The National League minors don't even have the pitcher hitting. So how then all of a sudden it's like you go up all the way through AA, AAA in the national. If you're a prospect in the Met system, you play your entire minor league career with a DH and then you get to the highest level and you have to hit. How is that fair? How is that productive? So I wish they would get rid of it, but I don't know if they're going to anytime soon. I would argue that it's the most asinine thing is that the 2 leagues have different rules. Every other pro sport has rules that are uniform across the board. Why does baseball have 2 different sets of rules? That makes no sense.
No, it makes no sense. Pitchers as a group this season are hitting .097 with 0 home runs. So
right. For every Madison Bumgarner, who is probably, at least from what I know, the best hitting pitcher. I know he's had some big home runs. He's hit home runs off Clayton Kershaw in the past. And for every hilarious Bartolo Colon moment, we have to watch 1,000 guys go up there and strike out or injure themselves running the bases. No thanks.
Yeah, no thanks is right. All right, great job, Andrew. It's been a pleasure having you with us. You do great work. Love your podcast. That's the Bronx Pinstripes podcast, which all of our listeners should check out and subscribe to on iTunes for really high-quality, in-depth analysis. Andrew, thanks so much for being with us on Bronx Bombers. We'll do it again sometime, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it, Joe.
All right, we'll come back. More Bronx Bombers in just a moment.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. Which of these 4 players Albert Pujols, Reggie Jackson, Babe Ruth, or Carl Yastrzemski was the only one not to hit 3 home runs in a World Series game? The answer? D. Carl Yastrzemski. And now here's Joe with this week's Twitter poll.
Yes, this week's Twitter poll results are in. We asked you this: should Clint Frazier be untouchable in trade talks? And 73% of our followers on Twitter at Bombers Podcast said no, and 27% said yes, Clint Frazier should be untouchable. So just to update those who haven't been following, Brett Gardner, who was just tearing it up in May and in June, had some pain in his right knee. Now, it doesn't appear to be serious, just normal wear and tear, but he had an MRI on Sunday that showed some inflammation. So in his absence, Clint Frazier got called up, and really, wherever Clint Frazier has played this year, since his recovery from that concussion in spring training, he has delivered the goods. In 38 AAA games this year, he's hitting .312 with 7 home runs, and during his brief time up with the Yankees, he's hitting .375. I believe he's reached base in every single game in pinstripes this year, had a single, scored a run last night, and we've got a bunch of guys down there in AAA that are big league material. Obviously, Brandon Drury, who's been on fire in Scranton, just destroying AAA pitching, but, he's blocked by Andujar, who's just, is vying with Glaber for AL Rookie of the Year. There's really no other candidates. But also we got Tyler Austin down there. We've got Billy McKinney. So we're loaded, folks. And the depth on this team is just unreal. And it's not a question of whether someone gets dealt. It's a question of who. Because there absolutely is not room for all these guys on the big league roster. And you do not want to lose players in the Rule 5 draft. Now, the Rule 5 draft, for those who don't know, prevents teams from stockpiling too many young players on their minor league affiliates when other teams would be willing to have those players play in the majors. And if you lose a player in the Rule 5 draft, which takes place every winter, you get zilch in return. So that needs to be avoided whenever humanly possible. Now, with Frazier, we all know the Yankees offered him to Pittsburgh as part of a deal for Garrett Cole last winter that didn't come through. At least that was the reporting, and until Herman started to look like an ace in some of these recent outings, it seemed like a slam dunk that the Yankees would go after a starter, and they still might. There's that school of thought that says you can never have enough starting pitching, and I usually subscribe to that school of thought, but as I discussed earlier, this staff has really started to shine, and I would absolutely hate to lose a guy as young and as gifted as Frazier, a guy under team control for years for peanuts, for a half-season rental of Cole Hamels or J Happ. I mean, sure, it's entirely possible that a deal for one of those guys could be the thing that puts us over the top and gets us our first title since 2009. But Gardner's not getting any younger, and he turns 35 in August, and I think that Frazier should be viewed as the heir apparent to Gardner in left field. All this guy has done, when given half a chance, is produce. He gets on base, he's got speed, he's got pop, he's a disciplined hitter, he's got a great attitude, and we do have other prospects. He's not the only one. We've got Billy McKinney, we've got Tyler Austin, we've got Estevan Florial. I mean, I like those guys, but, we've seen AAA prospect after prospect the past few years, from Judge to Sanchez to Andujar to Torres, come to the Bronx and excel, and I just have this feeling that Clint Frazier is that next guy, that guy that's going to bring speed and youth and solidify that outfield for years to come. And it's not just a feeling. I mean, the numbers are there. So I would say, nobody in AAA right now is untouchable. There's always two sides to every deal. And if, this won't happen, but if the Giants, for example, were willing to part with Bumgarner for Frazier and an add-on, you do it and you don't look back. But that's not going to happen. I don't see the Giants trading their franchise guy. And in my opinion, Frazier should be as close to untouchable as it gets. I think he's a dynamic player with tremendous upside, and I would hate like hell to lose him, for a 3-month rental when a spot in left field could be opening up in short order. All right, from this week's mailbag, our question of the week here on Bronx Bombers comes from Jimmy in Howard Beach. And by the way, the email is joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com, or you can find us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle, or give us a call at 646-854-4959. If you have any questions you want to have us answer on any future episodes, we are more than happy to do so. And Jimmy writes, love the podcast, diehard fan, been rooting for the Yankees since 1952. I like our roster, I like it a lot, But when people start comparing this team to the 1998 team, which is the best in history, in my opinion, I totally disagree. I'm not trying to be negative, but am I right or am I wrong on this? Well, thanks for that question, Jimmy. It's a very good one. And to find out the answer, let's take a look at the numbers. So the Yankees have now played 69 games, so 43% of their season. Wow, that's gone fast. And they have a winning percentage of .686. And the 1998 Yankees, after 69 games, had a winning percentage of .739. The 98 Yankees at this point in the season were 51-18. So obviously winning is the name of the game, and those numbers tell us that at the same point in their respective seasons, the 98 club was superior. Now, of course, that doesn't take into account quality of competition. That doesn't take into account injuries. I don't recall that team in 98 being nearly as injured as this one has been. So I decided to dig a little deeper in an effort to compare these two teams statistically. So I did the research, and what I found out shocked me right down to my socks, and I think it will shock Jimmy as well. Now, as I've said many times on this podcast, the Yankees this season have not been firing on all cylinders as a team at any point, not once. Now, early on, we were pretty well decimated by injuries, and then after we got healthy, we had some very serious prolonged slumps out of Didi, out of Sanchez, Stanton. Well, Stanton at least in the Bronx. It's worth pointing out, Stanton still has 16 home runs, 39 RBIs, and an OPS over 800. He has produced on the whole. He's just not putting up MVP-type numbers, at least not yet. So expectations created by his season last year have hurt him to an extent. But comparing the two teams offensively, in terms of power, there's no question that the current Yankees are superior to the 98 team. We've got 113 home runs already, and at the same point in that season, the 98 club had just 60. But that team was far better in the on-base percentage department, 364 to this current team's 330, and that's what drove their team OPS over the current Yankee squad. The 98 team OPS was 825, which is insane, and the current Yankee club's team OPS is 792. Nothing to sneeze at, but 33 points lower. But what shocked me is that the pitching of this current Yankees team, for all the complaining Yankee fans have been doing, myself included, this 2018 staff more than measures up to that 1998 squad. First of all, the bullpen right now is clearly better than the 98 bullpen. That 98 pen with Rivera, Mendoza, Mike Stanton, Jeff Nelson, Graham Lloyd had a collective ERA of 3.22, and the current Yankees pen, I'm just counting guys that have thrown 10 innings or more, so that's Chapman, Green, Robertson, Betances, Shreve, Holder, Adam Warren, A.J. Cole. Their collective ERA is an incredible 2.48 compared to 98's 3.22. But that isn't all. And here's what really shocked me, to the point where I actually had to recheck the numbers, because in the two episodes I did before the season started, episodes 4 and 5, I did a couple of extended segments on the greatest teams in franchise history. I placed the 98 club second only to the 1927 club, largely on the strength of their pitching. So are you sitting down? Because this really floored me. The 98 starting rotation comprised of Wells, Cone, Andy Pettit, El Duque, and Irabu. Their collective ERA was 3.82, and the current Yankees staff ERA is 3.43, and Severino's 2.09 ERA is by far the best on either team. The lowest ERA on that 98 staff was El Duque's, and that was 3.13, compared to Severino's 2.09, okay? The 98 Yankees team whip, that factors in walks, so it's walks plus hits per innings pitched. The 98 team whip was 1.25, and the current whip, 1.15. The Yankees strikeouts per 9 innings back in 98 was 6.7. The current Yankee staff strikeouts per 9 is an incredible 10.11, over a strikeout per inning. So again, this floored me because, as you well know, we had Sonny Gray cratering for a healthy portion of this season. We had Tanaka with a few very shaky outings, giving up way too many home runs. We had a couple of shaky outings from Montgomery and then from Domingo Germán. But despite all that, this staff is very much in the running as far as being as good, if not better, than that 98 staff. Now, Jimmy, 69 games does not a season make. That 98 team won 114 games and pretty much ran the table in the postseason, okay? They swept the Rangers in the ALDS. They beat the Indians 4-2, and then swept the Padres. So we've got a long way to go. Most of the season still to play. And by the way, another argument in Jimmy's favor is that there's no question in my mind that defensively, that 98 team was far better. Arguably the best Yankee team ever defensively. And we also didn't see the kind of base running gaffes that year that we've seen this season. But when I first read Jimmy's question, I got to be honest, my initial response was, of course he's right. Why bother even looking at the numbers? But the truth is, my answer at this point on June 20th has to be TBD. To be determined, because the numbers tell us that this pitching staff more than measures up, and the hitting, which again is yet to really come together as far as fulfilling its potential, in my opinion, is not far behind. So Jimmy, I agree with you that the 98 team, which excelled in all facets of the game, was the best baseball team I was ever privileged to witness in my lifetime. But I say this to you, I say it to the rest of the fans, I say it to myself. Don't undersell this current team. Are they flawed to an extent? Sure. We've had some bad slumps. We've had some shaky outings, as I said, but there's a reason we've got the best record in baseball. And the reason is that, this team is a damn good baseball team. So the final arbiter always is whether or not, they first of all win their division and second of all bring home a championship. But when the dust settles, as far as this 2018 squad being one of the best Yankee teams ever, top 10, top 15, that's entirely within the realm of possibility. In fact, I'd even say it's likely. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, and please do follow us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle, like us on Facebook as well, but most of all, have faith in the Yankees. We'll see you again next week.